Announced in February 2015 as a Kickstarter project, promising to be a genre-melding experience set in an alternate 1960s British-style environment, full of odd characters, drug addiction, and scavenging for everything needed to survive in this world gone mad. The game that would become known as We Happy Few got an impressive trailer during Microsoft's E3 2006 conference. The trailer harkened back to the days of the original BioShock game, before it was unveiled to be a survival game in early access that forced the player to simply find enough stuff to move across the spacey map. Listening to its player base, Compulsion Games added a full narrative featuring 3 acts, focusing on a trio of characters all attempting to escape Wellington Wells. Though it didn't appear to be the next BioShock, the promise of We Happy Few providing something memorable for all the right reasons was still there, even if the reviews of what was released 2 years ago gained mixed opinions at best. The original premise of We Happy Few had a completion idea simply based on the player taking a character throughout the fictional world of Wellington Wells, with the intent of becoming one of the beautiful people while avoiding permanent death via everything from crazed enemies to bees to hunger. The survival elements, though still existing in the finalized version, have been toned down in favor of the narrative implemented to give some more depth to the world and its people. After 30 hours of playing through the 3 acts, focusing on 3 different characters respectively, while finishing main and side quests alongside searching for items to continue the story, I saw the finale of Act 3 that completed the trio of excellent endings. And that's all I could handle with this game. Though initially seen as this generation's BioShock, We Happy Few proves to be anything but, as the player isn't running around shooting crazed splicers. Instead, is attempting to sneak around while trying to avoid detection upon trespassing in a home, taking on soldiers just waiting for another world war to break out, and drinking the water that is tainted with an hallucinogenic drug simply known as joy. We Happy Few, while not similar to its believed video game inspiration, does have a shockingly deep lore by placing the characters in a world where World War II didn't go as it did in reality. Through the eyes and actions of Arthur, Sally, and Ollie, the player sees the anguish of existing in a world that is focused more on forgetting than living, as all 3 protagonists attempt to save or vindicate themselves by escaping Wellington Wells. With the narrative placed into the game upon its final release, Compulsion Games has produced a mostly memorable story, featuring flawed characters stuck in a stressful situation that can get incredibly wacky. The strength of We Happy Few's story, and its characters featuring fantastic voice acting across the board, will keep most people playing, even if the gameplay itself struggles to reach its lofty ambitions. We Happy Few's gameplay is where everything falls apart. First, there's the combat, a melee system that doesn't break the mold in design, but is completely inconsistent. All 3 main characters can pull off light hits or charged heavy strikes, block incoming attacks with their hands or an equipped, degradable weapon, and throw items that can both infuriate and cause adversaries to uncontrollably vomit. The biggest issues with the melee combat is how loose everything feels, with the enemies being able to dash across the screen and land strikes before the player can even have a chance to react. The game provides a skill tree, and while abilities such as being able to run around the more prestigious areas of the game without angering its townspeople or having more strength to carry all the loot that one can find, combat skills don't feel like they have any effect on the quality of whatever the character's chances are for survival against a mob of enemies who didn't take kindly to what the character is wearing at the time. Stealth also plays a big role in the gameplay, especially early on when the character doesn't have much to craft weapons, such as a rock on a stick, or the aforementioned vomit bomb. Sneaking up behind intended targets, the player can perform a takedown and even carry the unconscious or deceased body to a hiding spot, such as a nearby trash can. Like the AI when going hand to hand, adversaries prove to be wildly inconsistent in not only their paths, but also in regards to their stability, randomly glitching from one spot to another that can cause an immediate detection moment when a player is attempting a stealthy takedown. Blending in is another big part of the gameplay, as each protagonist needs to wear the appropriate clothing in specific areas, such as Arthur tearing up his nice suit once he reaches the garden, to avoid being attacked by filthy outcasts who couldn't stand the absurdity of a society doped out of their minds. In regards to the drug usage, the implementation of joy is strange at best. Taking a joy pill will change the world's appearance for the player, causing a euphoric effect that also helps each character blend in with the wellies for a short time before the crash hits, and the character becomes an obvious downer, or someone who's off their joy. Even though the game warns a player that joy abuse will cause memory loss and hinder the character in certain ways, the only issue came when the joy meter on the left corner of the screen filled up and caused Arthur to become sick, while Ollie becomes ill after ingesting joy immediately, unlike Arthur and Sally. While an interesting concept, the implementation of joy doesn't add much to the overall experience after the first couple of times seeing its effects. In the middle of all of these gameplay elements are the three main characters that have different base stats, abilities, and social perceptions, such as Sally being a black market joy maker. Arthur is a jack of all trades who can craft almost everything available in the game, be it weapons, clothes, or chemicals, while handling himself fairly well in combat. Sally is physically weaker than her contemporaries, while focusing on projectiles to get her by, as she struggles to take people down without a specific chemical in her inventory. Ollie is a tank who's slower than the other two protagonists, while suffering from his inability to understand chemistry for crafting like Sally and Arthur. All three characters suffer from the needs of simply living, including hunger, thirst, and sleep, with each meter depleting after a while, and reducing the character's overall stamina until it's refilled. And societal opinions are different for each character, especially the nearly universally hated Ollie. Sally and Ollie also have two other health issues to manage, with the latter being less of a time diversion than Sally's. Thanks to the difficulty modifiers where the player can choose to turn down the combat and stealth in favor of story progression, a lot of these gameplay issues can be avoided, though it just further hinders the game's overall flow, something that is also hurt by We Happy Few's mission design. Missions in We Happy Few usually boil down to traveling across the land and retrieving a certain item to return it back to its quest giver. While there are some interesting missions here and there, a majority of what the player has to do is meandering and uninteresting, made even worse by the fact that certain mission destinations will force the player to traverse across the islands, losing minutes upon minutes of time just wandering forward with nothing interesting to see. There are fast travel points that can be unlocked featuring varying difficulties, but don't completely rid the game of its time management problems. Wellington Wells is also a randomly generated world, featuring randomized loot options and level designs, with the prior being a big hindrance on the game's flow and progression. A third of the way into Arthur's story, the character must break into an area with a lockpick made with bobby pins. Without the lockpick, the player will have to scour nearby areas in hopes of finding the parts needed. In my case, taking almost 2 hours to find what I needed. Sally's reliance on chemically based attacks can prove to be disappointing, thanks to not knowing what she'll need until she needs it, and no chemical set station being around to actually craft something like knockout juice to avoid a 5-on-1 fight. The idea of random loot tied in well with the game's original premise, but now that We Happy Few has a narrative with certain missions needing certain items, there's no reason why the developers didn't think about the player's needs first. The biggest issues attached to We Happy Few are definitely the game's overall stability and performance. As mentioned earlier, enemies can be glitchy and ruin stealth scenarios. There are imbalance issues during combat thanks to teleporting and, at times, invincible attackers. Adversaries can become stuck in walls or stairs, yet still successfully attack. NPCs will randomly suspect a protagonist even if that person is wearing the right clothes for the area. Quest items and givers can randomly become locked or even disappear. Add glitches both heartbreaking and hilarious, with frame rate drops and surprising loading screens that pop up while moving through an area that seems to have already generated ahead of the character, and you have a mess of a performance. There are also audio issues at times, including out-of-sync cutscenes, and, most importantly, the potential for crashing. During the last 2 hours of Act 1, the game continuously crashed when trying to load a mission simply involving Arthur entering a building, taking a good hour before the game got right. Sadly, this wasn't a rare occurrence during Act 1. Saving often is a must when playing We Happy Few. We Happy Few is the type of game you want to love, even if it didn't reach the heights of its promise. Yet the gameplay and design choices takes away the joy found when simply watching its layered characters interact with one another, or are having internal conflicts within themselves. Simply put, We Happy Few is a game placed in the wrong genre from a narrative perspective. The survival and RPG elements like crafting, looting, and managing certain meters were perfectly fine when it didn't have a story. But with the game now featuring a plot, without much of the initial gameplay design being restructured or even removed, getting to the next point of interest, be it during a quest or simply looking to see what's about to happen in the protagonist's stories, is a drag. Something that can be made worrisome when the game decides it can't handle its own ambitions, even though it would be considered on the low side of impressive in this generation of gaming from a graphics perspective. If the story sounds interesting, make sure you turn down the difficulty to avoid the mind-numbing and mostly broken gameplay. Even if a player wants to simply take in the gameplay, there's a sandbox mode based on the game's original premise. But even that experience is flawed due to performance issues and stability problems. We Happy Few is another example of unfulfilled promise meeting poor execution.
You monster! You're not human! Please! I'm only doing my job! I've got a wife! Please! You're not human! You monster! What are you? You monster!